Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. And joining us now to dive into really the first month and changes that President Trump is bringing in this first term. Troy Mayor Ethan Baker, a Republican, but in a nonpartisan role as mayor of Troy. And Kerry Jackson, who's known as the urban conservative. Good to see you both. And we should point out that Kerry was on the show a few weeks back. This is the first Republican president in recent history that you've kind of taken your support away from. You're not backing a lot of his policies. Ethan, you have to run an entire city, of course, with the help of the city manager and your council, with this ever-changing environment. So we'll begin with you. If this 25% tariff actually comes to fruition on Tuesday, what are you hopeful for and what do you fear?
Yeah, I think that's a big if. First of all, it's Thursday. It's Thursday, right? And Tuesday, March 4th is a long time away. Yeah. A lot can happen in a Trump administration over the next 4 or 5 days. So I'm not so certain there will be those tariffs on Tuesday like was announced today. But every economist I hear from says these are a bad idea, right? And you know, the president obviously is working with something. He's got big ideas for what he wants to accomplish with the border, stopping the fentanyl from coming over, cleaning up border security overall. So I understand where he's coming from, and I know he talks a big talk and he puts big things out there and hopes to get the result he's looking for. I worry a little bit in Troy about how that does affect the economy. We know in our 11th congressional district, which is Troy's the biggest city in there, we export $1 billion of goods to Canada. Those are goods. We export $200 million in services to Canada. If they put retaliatory tariffs back on us here in Michigan, we could be in big trouble financially. But, you know, again, Tuesday's a long way away from here. I don't know that it's actually going to happen, but I do worry about what it's going to mean.
You know, I think one thing I love about doing this show is that, look, there's more than one truth at the same time. Yeah. You know, there is the fact that this president uses tariffs as a pretty massive, big tool in the toolbox. We also know that in 2017, he had put some tariffs through. We also understand that there's a reason he's doing these tariffs. Kerry, I want to ask you, I know that this is not a president whose policies you support blindly, and in many ways you've spoken out against them. Do you think tariffs are a good tool to get people to do what you need them to do?
There are times when you need to use strategic tariffs. I'm not going to say never use them. Of course, there are times that we need to use them. However, the way that they're being used by our current president, especially with the economy, this is not 1980, it's 2025. Simply by saying, you know, I'm going to give corporations a tax cut and they'll all come on board. We now have an economy that's based on, as you said earlier, not just the auto industry, which is also based on Mexico, Canada, and the U.S., but we are interchanged with a lot of other companies, a lot of other countries, and a lot of parts. And just imagine the number of folks who are going to become unemployed overnight simply based on fear about what might happen. And how many of those live in Troy? How many of them live in Oakland County and in our community? Our economy is based on how people feel. But it's based on sentiment.
If I may, though, if we talk about if history repeats itself and if this is a president who sticks by his words and promises, which whether you like him or not, he does. He said in 2016 that he would put tariffs down. He did. We had dishwashers and solar panels that had some pretty heavy tariffs. And countries like China, Mexico, and Canada saw this movie before, but it ended within a year. And the U.S. got what it needed. Why not do that again in your mind?
Everyone wants to stop fentanyl. There's nobody, and you'll never be able to find somebody to come on your program that's going to say, we want more drugs, we want more people overdosing in your country. Everybody wants the border to have some sort of semblance of order. We want it. It's simply the way that the current president is doing it is not at all helping the people or our country.
Do you think Biden did it the right way, Mayor Baker? And do you believe that maybe Trump is using his tactics that he was elected by 75 million people to do?
No, I think it's funny, we don't talk about Biden much anymore. Interesting how quickly things change, right? But the fascinating thing to me is Trump is clearly trying to assert some dominance on the global stage again. He's trying to show that we're strong, we're powerful, we do what we want within the bounds of reason. And these tariffs are part of that, I think. He comes out with a big hammer. He typically does. That's who he is. If you look back at Donald Trump over 4 or 5 decades in his public eye, he says big things, he does big things, but things move fast. So I don't expect these tariffs. If they do go into effect on Tuesday, I don't expect them to last long, because what this president likes more than anything is coming up with a deal and a solution that he can take credit for and say, look what I did.
What Ethan just said, or Mayor just said, is within the bounds of reason. Donald Trump doesn't do things within the bound of reason. If he did those things within the bound of reason, I'd support him. But he doesn't do those things within the bounds of reason. He does, as I've said before, he's always been the bull in the china shop. He doesn't care what's broken. He doesn't care who's hurt. And if we're ever going to wind up talking about, you know, the budget, again, it's not we're going to cut costs within the bound of reason. We're cutting costs and we're going to harm people who actually, the veterans fought for this country and they deserve their money. The senior citizens earned the money that you're cutting. If you're going to cut $800 billion, try not to slash it all from there. Slash it a little where from somebody that can afford it.
And Speaker Mike Johnson just earlier today in Washington made it very clear that the $880 billion that needs to be cut from the Energy and Commerce Department there will not touch Medicare, or it won't touch Social Security. We'll watch carefully. Okay. We care. We all want to make sure that happens, that doesn't happen. Let's talk for a moment about the border. President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris at the time, by unequivocally we can say that their policy did not help. The border opened up, people came in, and there are people right here in Michigan who lost children because of that, because of fentanyl. And I want to talk to one of those moms who lost her stepson. Take a listen. Happy so far with the moves that President Donald Trump has made to curb this problem?
So great question. At the end of the day, thankfully, this issue is a nonpartisan issue. I feel that with this administration, they are keyed in to the sense of urgency. And that's part of our message, is that the urgency of this is never going to go away, because one child is too many.
And that's from a couple who lost a child. And so the question that then becomes, look at the border crossings and how drastically they went down. Would you say that's a Trump success story, Kerry?
Oh, clearly it's a success story, and he's going to take credit for it, of course.
Mayor?
Two different statements you just made. It is a success story. The border crossings are down. I think that's going to play a big role. It's got to be sustainable. We've got to make a difference. The fentanyl crisis is a crisis. I don't know that it touches everybody in the country like the economy does. And so that's, as a political scientist, as a politician, I guess, that makes me a little bit concerned when you talk about tariffs as trying to control the border as it relates to fentanyl.
The concern that so many people have is the fact that if you look at numbers, more than 9,000 kilograms of fentanyl came through Mexico. So the need for a tariff there perhaps would be understandable. 19 kilograms of fentanyl came from Canada. Why is the northern border, in your mind, being treated the same as the southern border?
I think Prime Minister Trudeau pissed off President Trump at one point, and he's taken it out a little bit on him. And that's part of it. Also, if I was the Prime Minister, he's got nothing to lose at this point. He's not going to stay in power. He should be out there saying, we're not the problem with fentanyl here in Canada. You're going to hurt our country and your people and our people by doing this. I'm worried about fentanyl just like you, but focus where it really is coming through. If I were Trudeau, that's what I would say.
I want to talk about the guardrails real quickly. As someone who's been in this country, loves this country, and wants this country to do well, I want both of you to answer me the question. Guardrails in place, congressional guardrails, courts, to make sure that this administration doesn't go too far. Do you have faith in that? No.
We found out that the guardrails don't work, that we all were told when we were growing up that don't worry, there are checks and balances, that we have them, that these, as long as the members of Congress have decided we're not going to do our job, as long as there are judges on the Supreme Court who will rubber stamp anything that Donald Trump wants them to do, those guardrails don't work.
But there are attorneys general across the country. There are judges in federal courts across the country that have stopped so many of the policies that he's wanted in place.
Well, those are there for a reason, and what they've done, and they've paused them, but as we saw last night at 11:30, even if you have judges on the Court of Appeals who agree with you, the Trump administration will quickly run to the Supreme Court and you'll get something unusual, a Supreme Court justice that will say, no, don't worry, you don't have to pay that money, we're going to pause it.
Mayor Baker?
I don't think that's exactly right, and Chief Justice Roberts he's not a Trump fan, I don't think. I mean, he's a conservative, no question.
We thought he wasn't, but what happened yesterday sort of makes me doubt it.
Is it possible possible that he was following the laws he saw fit as the Chief Justice of the United States. Doesn't mean it's going to not get overturned. I think the problem with the guardrails is they're very slow. So we don't feel it like everybody else. You see the fast-moving actions taken, but it's a year or two sometimes before the guardrails bring everything back in and correct anything. So that's the fear, I think. The guardrails are in place, and they do work.
Mayor Baker, thank you both for joining us here on The Pulse tonight and for your perspective. We appreciate both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Turning to the skies and a ton of disasters and near misses in just the first 2 months of the year. What we're learning about the latest one in Chicago. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2.